Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video.
Finally. Took them long enough to make another good movie. Yeah, I guess I'm front-loading it a little, but I just got back from seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I have to admit, I was very skeptical going in, because after Endgame, Marvel has not been doing very well. Really, Marvel's decline started before Endgame and Infinity War. I think it really kind of started with Ant-Man, actually. I mean, sorry to everyone involved, but like, that was the movie that kind of introduced this idea of, let's use humor to undercut the drama and stuff like that. That was the first Marvel movie I had gone to where I really kind of felt like it wasn't that good. You go back to my original review, I mean, it grew on me as time went on, but I still never really thought it was the best Marvel movie. And it was really since that point that we started to see Marvel's quality start to fluctuate in the movies. And I wasn't really that thrilled with their version of Spider-Man. I wasn't that thrilled with Infinity War. I kind of thought Endgame was a good enough place to stop, but the more I think about it, the more problems keep popping up with it. And ever since then, I mean, initially I just figured after Endgame I was done because it felt like a conclusion. It felt like the end. I'd been on that ride for 10 years, same as everyone else. I was like, yeah, I've had enough. I can step back and just let it go. But since catching up with various entries in it, oof. I mean, all those people who are ranting about it on YouTube and making their careers ripping into these things, they're not wrong. But then again, if you've been on the internet for longer than 5 minutes, you don't need me to explain to you all the things that are wrong with Marvel and the MCU these days. Bad special effects because Disney is overworking the effects crews. Cringe-inducing humor that undercuts the drama and is very poorly timed. Really, really bad character writing, introducing characters that people don't like, agenda pushing, you know, all of it. And then of course you've got stuff like Disney in general being a horrible corporation. The part where I actually decided I was no longer going to support Disney if I could help it was when I learned about what happened with the live-action Mulan remake and how they worked with certain really bad places over in the glorious People's Republic of China. Yeah, that was the moment where I was like, okay, the mouse has gone too far. I am not going to give them my money anymore, again, if I can help it. Difficult to do because Disney has their fingers in so much. I might support an individual project here and there, but I was not going to regularly support Disney. And yet, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was the one thing that I felt might get me back. See, I'd always thought that the Guardians of the Galaxy movies were the best parts of the MCU. I like the other stuff just fine, sure, but something about Guardians of the Galaxy was just so different from the rest. It felt like it was its own thing, for starters, but it also had this grandeur to it. This sense of just, not necessarily anything goes, but like they could introduce anything they wanted, and they could actually make it work. Like, whoever would have guessed prior to the release of that first movie that people would be shedding tears at the death of a talking tree, or feeling something as a talking raccoon that has a gun fetish connects with some blue dude with a bright red metal mohawk. It sounds like it should be the most ridiculous thing ever, the sort of thing that shouldn't work, that shouldn't evoke a strong emotional reaction, and yet, even when I know it's coming, I still get a little bit misty-eyed at the end of that second Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I can't help myself. They're that good. But Infinity War and Endgame kind of, I don't know what the right word is, hijacked, interrupted, derailed, take your pick. It derailed a lot of stuff in the MCU, to be honest, and I think that's part of why post-Endgame the MCU has been a little directionless. I don't think that's the only reason, but it's a big part of it. But with Guardians especially, it hit really hard because, you know, spoiler alert for a movie that's been out for a couple of years, they killed Gamora, and then they brought her back in the clumsiest way possible, basically setting her character further back than square one, because this was well before she'd even decided to betray Thanos. And I was always thinking, like, how is the third movie going to get around that? Because I highly doubt it's going to be set before Infinity War. But if it's going to be after, like, that's going to be a huge hurdle, to say the least. Plus, you know, the overall quality of the MCU has been declining, as mentioned, so would Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 really be worth it? The only thing that had me hopeful was that James Gunn was still attached, and James Gunn is what made those movies work in the first place. His own personal politics aside, he still knows how to make those movies good movies. So, I admit, I wasn't sure. I actually held a poll on Twitter seeing if people, basically asking if I should go, because I was that hesitant. But more people said yes than no, so I went. And I am truly surprised that it turned out this good. Now you gotta understand, when I say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is really good, I'm not just speaking in comparison to everything that's come post-Endgame. Yes, it's better than all of those, but that's a very low bar to pass. The only two entries of phases 4 and 5 that I would say actually worked for me, well, I mean, not counting the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, which was okay, but still not the best they've ever been, I would say, like, Spider-Man No Way Home certainly knew how to play the nostalgia card to the hilt, though that was a little affected by the fact that I was never that big on MCU Spider-Man to begin with. And Shang-Chi had its moments, but ultimately kind of felt like maybe it should have been its own thing too, and shouldn't have been part of the MCU. It should have... we can discuss Shang-Chi another time. The point is, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is not just good compared to them. It's good as a whole. Like, it feels like the kind of movies Marvel used to make, genuinely. It's that good. It's actually far more serious than I expected it to be. I haven't watched any other videos about it because I wanted to go in completely blank slate, but I have noticed a couple of titles of videos floating around saying that it's a very dour, depressing misstep. I mean, yes, it is very serious compared to the other two movies, but it's not completely lacking in humor, and honestly, I think the fact that it is more serious is to its benefit, because you really can't tell this kind of story in a funny way, especially not the stuff with Rocket. I mean, I don't necessarily want to spoil anything for you this early, but Rocket's story, where we finally learn how he was made and what his young life was like, I mean, my word. Again, it's that sense of you don't expect something with a talking raccoon to be that emotional, and yet it is. How James Gunn does it, I don't know. But it's not just that, it's this overall sense that Gunn knows this is his last hurrah with these characters. He wants to give them a proper send-off, and so he gives everybody just the right amount of drama, with some comedy to balance it out, because that's what he does, but he's not treating it all as a joke. Even the humorous parts still somehow speak to the characters in ways that are, again, like, they can be silly, they can get a laugh, but it's far more profound than the other kind of humor you'll find in these movies, like Thor Love and Thunder just going, haha, Thor has this weird love tryst with his current hammer and his old hammer. Isn't that just so silly? No, it's not like that. There's real heart here. And I think that's very important to have. That's what's been missing from these movies. Heart. Guardians of the Galaxy has miles and miles of heart, as the song goes. And it was so desperately needed. Now, there are a couple of characters that don't get as much attention as the others. Literally a couple, as in two. Kraglin and Cosmo. They kind of come up with an excuse to not have them in the movie all that much. Even they get their moment, though. So I don't feel like they were poorly used. They were certainly underused, but, you know, when they got to shine, they really got to shine. But of course, we also have the introduction of characters like Adam Warlock and the High Evolutionary. That is his name, right? High Evolutionary, not Grand Evolutionary. I'm just going to use High. Warlock is interesting. Like, they obviously set him up at the end of Volume 2, and this makes the third movie one of the few post-Endgame MCU films to actually follow up on one of those things. Again, similar to Cosmo and Kraglin, he's not used that much, but I do think he's used just enough. I'm thinking there's clearly a plan to use him more in the future, but for introducing him, it's not bad. He, well, I don't necessarily want to spoil anything in this video, so let's just say he's good enough for what the plot needs. He also, for some reason, makes me think he was styled after David Bowie to a certain degree. I think it's the hair, but that's just a beside the point detail. As for the High Evolutionary, he is a remarkably effective villain. You could say there's a little bit of a retread with ego for him, because he is again another cosmic villain who wants to remake the universe as he wants it to be. But it's not the exact same as Ego. It's not just like they put Ego's plan to a different character. The High Evolutionary has a very different outlook. He is far more insidious, far more hands-on, far creepier. I mean, the way you see him going about all of this stuff, the way he reacts to things, the way he plans things out, the way he views his own creations, I mean, he's very, very good. Definitely one of the best villains that the MCU has ever brought about. Again, I realize that's not a very high bar to pass, because the MCU has always had a villain problem. But he's definitely up there. I think people will be remembering him for a while. Surprisingly, there aren't even any agendas. There's no pushing for political ideas. There's no side commentary of any sort that feels forced. The closest we ever get actually feels very self-aware, where the High Evolutionary says that he visited Earth once and found it to be the most amazing place ever if it weren't for all of the bigotry and violence. And Star-Lord actually cuts him off, saying, no, I don't need to hear another psycho villain rationalizing why he wants to conquer the universe. And I was so happy to hear that, because finally, the MCU produces a movie, again, that isn't telling you what you should think. Instead, it's just presenting its story. That was a relief. And while, again, I don't want to spoil anything, I will say that the ending, again, without going into detail, feels earned. It was an appropriate ending for this sort of thing. It's unexpected in a lot of ways. Again, I'm not going to give away the details just yet, but it felt like the way that we got there felt earned. It felt like that was the best way to get there, or at least the best way they could come up with. Even the stuff with Gamora actually, surprisingly, worked out. Like, that was the one thing I was really wondering about. Like, how were they going to deal with the fact that the Gamora they now had to work with was not the same one who had been developed over the last couple of movies? But they found a way. They found a way that not only was good for her, but good for the other characters around her. It was all about getting the characters to a place where we could feel like they were finally where they had to be. That's the basic idea here. This is how you give characters that people love a proper send-off, at least as far as I'm concerned. But does that mean I've been won back over and will continue supporting the Marvel movies henceforth? Heck no. This movie was an anomaly, I'm certain. And it actually reminds me of how back, I think, between the release of the first and second Guardians movies, there was news going around that James Gunn was actually supposed to be put in charge of the MCU's more spacefaring cosmic side of the story, which is why the credits for Volume 2 had so much setup in it. And yet, he wound up getting fired because there was a whole cancel culture debacle, you may recall. And then they brought him back on after the movies he started making at other studios wound up doing well, and Disney was like, no, you belong with us. You're going to finish your Guardians movie and make us all the money, right? Right. But it makes me think that maybe they did make a huge mistake not letting that happen. In fact, I almost wonder if part of the reason James Gunn made this movie this good before going off to Warner Brothers to work with DC was almost as an act of revenge. Like, he makes the best movie out of a sea of garbage, and having done that, he then goes, yeah, smell you later, I'm going to work for your rivals. I mean, I can't prove it, but I wouldn't put it past him either. But the main point is, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 really did surprise me. It is a good film. It is worth seeing. It might be the only current Marvel thing really worth seeing. But I wouldn't let it get your hopes up for the rest of the MCU. But I don't want to end this on a negative note, so again, it's a good film. I'm amazed, but it really is good. And that's all I have to say right now, so if you guys have managed to see it yet, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omnivault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.